Okay, guys, we start every new chapter with an introductory lesson in the form of a keynote. You are going to listen to what we call a screen recording of this note session. If we were in the classroom, I would be going to have this projected up on the screen and we would be going through this together. Now, you're going to write exactly what I write if you are a very average note taker, and at the end, you're going to have an outline. This is a 2-day assignment, so if you want to do it the right way, you write down exactly what I write in the keynote, and then you also include other information that I will say. That's going to help you to improve your note taking. Now, our first lesson in world history class is on prehistory. And what I always start with in the classroom is a quick answer to that question of what is prehistory? What is the difference between prehistory and history? And usually somebody comes up with the right answer because we've already done a couple vocabulary words by this point on this. And the definition for prehistory is very simple. It is the time before writing was invented. The time before written record, was invented. Now, this lesson from the start is going to be told from a total scientific and historic standpoint. All right, we're going to be talking about things that were millions of years old as measured and as dated by historians and scientists. So please make sure, once again, as we go through this quick introduction to prehistory, that you know that it was taken and is taken from a historical and scientific standpoint. Now, the place where we start is talking about the people that are the researchers. Now, there's two groups of people that we're going to talk about from the start. They're called anthropologists and they're called archaeologists. Now, most of you have heard of archaeologists before, but some of you might not know who anthropologists are. Now, anthropologists are the scientists and researchers on Earth that study people. They study hominids, early people of skeletal remains, of all people that have been found on Earth, okay? Archaeologists are a little bit different. They study pretty much artifacts. Now, if we were in the classroom at this point, I'd ask you to raise your hand and ask you what an artifact was. So think about that question for a couple seconds. A specific example of an artifact would be a tool, a vase, a fork, a bone, a piece of jewelry. Now, what happens is, once the archaeologists study the artifacts, they get together with the anthropologists and they come up with an idea about how people lived before they started writing it down. And that's their culture. They talk about the culture and the way that people lived a very, very long time ago. So when in doubt, these researchers basically guess. Now, the second part of our lesson today is to talk about how we measure how old living things are and non-living things are. If you've ever been to a museum, you'll be looking at a pot and it says, oh, this pot is about 40,000 years old. Well, how do you know that? How do you know that in today's lesson later on, we're going to talk about skeletal remains of a person that is said to be 3.5 million years old? Okay? Well, here's the first step. The first step is called radiocarbon dating. Now, we're not going to get too much into the science of this, but you can use this process to measure how old living things are, measuring bones, measuring skin, and things like that. Now, make sure you write this down. You can use radiocarbon dating to measure how old something is up to about 50,000 years ago. 50,000 years ago, 50. Please make sure you write that down. Now, to measure how old living things are much farther back than that, you use different dating methods. One is called potassium-argon dating, which studies the rate of decay of atoms, radiocarbon atoms that you have in your body. Other methods using compounds and elements, okay? But basically what happens here is radiocarbon dating is used to measure how the rate of decay of atoms are. So when you find a bone, they can date how old that bone was by looking at and measuring and dating how the radiocarbon atoms in people, carbon atoms in living things and animals, decayed, the rate of decay. And that's how you find that out. And this chart gives you a good idea from a very scientific standpoint of how that actually works. But the real question is, well, that seems somewhat easy since they're living things. They left behind bones and skin and so on. But what about that pot? What about that vase? What about that piece of jewelry? How do we measure how old something is that is non-living? Well, in 1991, 1992, I was a junior, senior in high school. Do not do the math. And I remember on the front page of the newspaper that there was this person that the world called the Iceman that was found in the Alps. And there's a real cool little story here that you can see, and some of you get grossed out by the picture, but you can see exactly what was going on here. Now, these men had found and stumbled across them in the Alps. They found this guy. And it got dated back. The person, we radio and carbon dated this person, and it got back to he was about 5,000 years old. Well, that's easy. But the Iceman is actually talking to you right now. He is actually telling you the answer as to how we find out how old non-living things are. Look at the chart and the little diagram there. Now you can see the Iceman. And you can see a cape fragment, and you can see a birch canister, and you can see a copper axe, and you can see a bow, and you can see his backpack template. And I would ask you in class, and take a couple seconds to think about this, by looking at that diagram, how do we measure how old non-living things are? Some of you might be thinking, where are they found in the levels of the earth, which is a good answer I usually get, and so on. But here's the answer. What we do when we find a bow or a cape fragment is we measure how old the living things are that are found really close to that cape fragment. So if the Iceman was found in a certain level, and a little bit away from him was a cape fragment and a bow and a copper axe, we assume that those were probably his. Once we measure how old the Iceman or a living thing is, then we can measure how old the non-living things are around them. And that's how we do it. Now, the third part of class is we're going to get into the first time period in prehistoric times. Now, historians and scientists call this the Paleolithic Age. That is the big boy and big girl name for this time period. It's also called, and we're going to find out that these prehistoric ages, and there were three of them, were called Stone Ages. So the Paleolithic Age is also called the Old Stone Age. Now, from a historic and scientific way of thought, this is the time period on Earth that happened millions of years ago. Now, it's the earliest period of human history, and basically all of our information about this time period comes from East Africa. Now, there's one thing that we knew about these people, and that they were nomads. Now, if I were to tell you or ask you in class what a nomad was, think about that for a second. What is a nomad? Your answer would probably be it's a person that moves from place to place. And in these days, it literally meant a person that moves from cave to cave. Now, we call them cave people, caveman, cave woman, and that's where that comes from. Now, this early period of human history starts there in East Africa. And I told you a second ago that we're going to talk about someone that was measured back to be about 3 million years ago. And this person was found in Ethiopia. In 1974, the year that I was born, do not do the math, we find the skeletal remains of a female that was dated once again to be about 3 million years old. And her name was Lucy. Now, Mary Leakey, who had found the skeletal remains, was a huge fan of the band The Beatles. Now, some of you might be a fan of the Beatles, and the number one song in the United States of America in 1974 was Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and that's where Lucy is going to get her name. Now, Lucy was said to be an Australopithecus, and we found a couple people dating back that old in that same general area. Now, these people were not very smart. Now, the reason why the Stone Ages were called Stone Ages is because they simply used stone artifacts. They would just use stone, maybe chip away at it a little bit. They weren't smart enough to take a stick and a stone and tie it together with a vine to make a hammer, for example. Now, if you lived during this time period, you pretty much knew what happened and what your responsibilities were in life. Okay? Now, the men were the hunters. You weren't very smart. You were the ones that woke up every morning and went and hunted animals. And most of the time, you would hunt all of the animals up in one place and kill all of the animals in one place to the point where you couldn't use it all and you would have to move. And that's why we think that these people were moving a lot to follow the resources, to follow the food. Now, women, you were not very smart either. You woke up in the morning and you were called the gatherers because you would leave your cave and you would go to the bush and pick seeds and different things like that and bring them back to your cave. So that's why these people's jobs in history were called hunters and gatherers. Now, we do have an idea about what these people believed in. Now, once again, the anthropologists and the archaeologists got together and they came up and talked about culture and how these people lived. Now, we believe that they believed in an afterlife. We believe that they wore clothing. And we believe that they believed in spirits. So let me ask you, in class, I would normally ask, how do we know that people wore clothes millions of years ago? Now, usually, people would answer, because when we found their skeletal remains, it seemed and appeared to have fur and clothing around them. All right? That's how we would know that. The next thing that I would ask you is the second easy one on the list would be the afterlife. How do we know, before people started writing, that these folks might have believed in an afterlife? Take a couple seconds and think about that. How do we know that they believed in an afterlife? Well, the answer that we would talk about in class is when we found these people and the skeletal remains of these people, there were items buried with them. There were little satchels of food. There was ash. There was flint. There was, later on, there was weaponry that were taken with them. Maybe like a little keepsake, like a little necklace or something was buried with them. And we kind of deduce from that possibly these people believed in an afterlife, that they were taking these things with them into another life. Now, the toughest one is to figure out how we know that these people believed in spirits. Well, they didn't write it down, but we have a general idea. So I would ask you in class to raise your hand and tell me, how do we know that people that lived millions of years ago believed in spirits? And you would throw out a bunch of answers and so on, and eventually someone would say cave paintings. Cave paintings. Now, this is a famous cave painting that was found in France. It's called the Hall of Bulls, and it's called the Lascaux Cave. Now, this was done by a Paleolithic artist sometime from 13,000 BC to 15,000 BC. Now, what I would ask you to do in class is to look at this cave painting and tell me something that you would see. Now, it's called the Hall of Bulls, so you can see that there were bulls here. You can see over to the right of the painting that there were deer because you see antlers. You can see that it looks like a horse that has a mane, and then over to the far left, it looks like there's an animal that's spotted that has antlers too that we don't know what that is. Now, if you're looking at the animals, look in the central part and the middle part of the painting just below what looks like to be a horse. Now, a couple of those animals appear to have stripes. Now, you would probably say, and someone always says that, Mr. Hamilton, there's a zebra in this picture. And yes, there is. People that have looked at this cave actually say that. And they also say that there's a lion in this picture that they have depicted. So my question is, which is a question for another day as well, this cave was found in France, yet people were painting zebras and lions within the walls of this cave. So were there zebras and lions running around downtown Paris back in the day? Or did someone see this in their native land and migrated up to France and drew what they remembered in their homeland? That's a story for another day. But the original question that I wanted to ask you about this cave was, how do we use cave paintings to think that people believed in spirits? Now, what I would do in class is I would tell you to look in the top right-hand corner of the cave painting. And there's a part of the cave that is really black. The top right-hand corner, it's really shaded in dark and black, and someone did paint that. And I would ask you, what does that look like? And many of you would have many answers over the last 25 years of what it looked like. But I'm going to tell you what it is. It's a bull with wings. It's a bull with wings. And you guys might argue with me. I usually say that it looks like a bat. And some of you will argue that that picture up there in black, the shaded area, does not look like a bat. Well, I think it does. So let's just say, for example, that that image in the top right-hand corner of the cave painting is a bull with wings. That helps us to answer the question about these people believing in spirits. And it's no different than our Native Americans that lived here in the United States, in the territory that is now the United States. They believe that their animals were their spirits, and they killed these animals and used every part of it, and they believe that they were the spirits. So it's not too far-fetched to believe that a person would paint a bull with wings, have it represent the spirits of these people that lived back during the Paleolithic time period. Now, for you artists in the crowd, I apply to you sometimes, and I will appeal to you sometimes. Just a couple fun facts about this. You can see the zebra or the striped animal. What happened was, when they found this painting, there was hollowed out bones that had paint in them. So what happened was, the painter was putting his hand up against the wall and spitting the paint from his mouth through the hollowed bone to paint this picture. There was also scaffolding that was found towards the top of this cave, which appears to be someone was climbing up there to paint up on top of the cave, kind of like a Michelangelo dangling from the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel when he was painting that beautiful work of art. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about, and the final thing today, is the Ice Age. And it's not considered one of the 3 prehistoric ages by historians and researchers, but it was definitely a time period that is going to affect the people that were living on Earth during that time. Ice Age obviously is popularized in culture because of the movies that we've all seen. My kids all love them too. But the Ice Age was 4 different cold weather periods that started about 1.5 million years ago. Now, the Ice Age is going to make people and animals make decisions. So the Ice Age was just this. The Ice Age is when there was northern ice caps up in the North Pole. If you have the map of the world on your mind right now, way up north, there was these northern ice caps that moved south, and it joined glaciers, which were moving sheets of ice. Now, the glaciers that were down south are going to run into these northern ice caps, and the land that was in between these 2 ice bodies of ice are going to push the land in between them up, which is going to form the great mountain ranges of our world. Now, almost every place on Earth during this time, at least the top 1/3 part of the Earth, was basically covered by ice. The other main fact that we need to know is today, Earth is covered by water by a tenth. A tenth of the Earth is water. Back then, only a third of the Earth was covered with water because of the Ice Age. So we're going to talk to the next class period about people living on islands during this time, and we're going to find Paleolithic sites that were found on islands, okay? And no, the people didn't swim there, and we don't think they boated there, but we do think they walked there, or in this case, probably ran there to escape the cold and so on. And while escaping, they're going to disappear. Some were able to escape the ice. Some were able to move quickly. Those people survive. Those people that we're talking about are Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons. The animals that ran and survived still have ancestors today, like the alligator and so on. The sharks, if you're watching Shark Week recently, are ancestors to these prehistoric beings. And the people that were going to try to survive this and most failed were Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons, which is something that we're going to start with during our next class period. So this is part 1 of our note session on prehistory, and we will continue part 2 when we come to our next class period.